Okay, hi there, everyone. It is Sunshine, and this is the Woman's Womb, and it is our weekly female discussion panel. And I'm so grateful to have Zamara here with us. Zamara. See, I should just stick with Zam. Thank you so much. I think Robin's going to be joining us in a little bit. Unfortunately, Maggie wasn't able to make it again this week. She's spending time with her beautiful grandchildren. So we will catch up with her hopefully next week. And I did put out a link for anybody who wanted to join in, any other ladies who would like to join in on the panel. In fact, why don't I go ahead and put a link in the chat room if there's any ladies there who are so inspired to join in. Oh, now I have to find it. Here it is. Okay, I'm muted. Hey, Hatter, how's it going? Thanks for being here. So how are you doing this week, Zam? How's your week been? Are you there? Oh, there you are.
Hey, sorry about that.
That's
My
all right.
audio went out.
So how's your week been? I know we were just talking a little bit about it before we started here, but yeah, how have you been?
It's been a good week. Pretty introverted. Writing a lot, processing a lot. I mean, introverted the ending of the week. I think the start of the week was actually I was spending a lot of time talking to a lot of people and going a lot of places. But yeah, I'm feeling pretty chill today. I don't know, just continuing the process or the journey, and working on really honing in on my crafts in terms of like developing my musical skills and writing and such things. How about you?
I have been really busy working this week. I've put in about 45 hours this week, and so yeah, I've been doing that, and I've just been kind of sitting back. My intuition, which is why I kind of wanted to bring up the topic, is my intuition has really been in a different place, and well, not a different place. I don't even know how to say it. So I just have had a lot kind of going on with me, and it's not anything new. Sometimes my intuition is really tuned in, and sometimes it's not, but I feel like I'm in this decision making kind of space, and it's been kind of a weird energy. I feel like I've been experiencing multidimensional realities and kind of bleeding through for a long time. And when that happens, when it's really strong, um, it's hard for me to figure out what's really going on. And so that's part of why I wanted to have this discussion panel today. Um, so for me, when I was a kid, um, intuition was not something that was, I think I was very tuned in as a kid, and it was something that wasn't cultivated in me. I didn't have mentors and that kind of thing. And so um, I didn't know, I never learned really how to follow my intuition. Um, I mean, that wasn't a topic in my family's discussion, like gut feeling and stuff like that. So, and then being a really intuitive kind of person and feeling things very deeply, I didn't know how to manage that, and so I did a lot of running from feeling for a lot of years, with a lot of drug use and stuff. And so because that was my form of escapism, I wasn't tuned in at all. So it's been kind of a journey for me to learn how to um, listen to my intuition and really know what that is and what that feels like and what that sounds like. And and another interesting thing and this has been ongoing for quite some time, but when it comes to like experiencing multidimensional realities, um, I kind of had confirmation from that when I ran into a new Netflix series. It's called the OA, and it's about like being able to jump timelines and experience oneself within those other dimensions, and was very interesting for me. In a way, it was confirmation because time travel has been on my radar recently, and so is multidimensional realities. So I don't know. I feel that my intuition is tuned into that, but I'm not exactly sure what it means. I'm not exactly sure, what kind of communication is happening with me. Uh, we talk about how everything is a projection of ourselves, and yet I feel that there's something else that I'm communicating with, or acknowledging, or intuitively connected with, or something that is more than just myself. So I don't know. That's kind of that's pretty much how I can explain what's been happening to me. What has your experience been with intuition, Zam?
Um, well, I mostly have learned to go with my intuition in social settings. When it comes to my intuition, um, in terms of what you're talking about with like multidimensional realities, I had a lot of this um, in my ego, really dark ego death kind of phase, and really towards the end of that, where things were wrapping up. And um, I don't know. I guess I do still have them now because I do still have days. It's shorter spans of time. You know what I mean? That I feel like I'm kind of um, somehow energetically in more than one place,
Mm-hmm.
and like like there are perhaps heavier things going on in those other places than what I might be physically experiencing here. Um, Whereas before it might go from anywhere from 3 days to a week to 2 weeks. Now it tends to be between 3 to 4 days, you know.
Right on.
Still, when it comes to like intuiting what that means, it's like you said, like, what the hell? What is
Right.
this I am connected to? But I tell myself that's the cosmos and kind of like the astral realms, if you want to take it metaphysical.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think, like in the OA series, one of the things that is prominent in the series are near death experiences? And where do people really go? And what is it that they experience in those? And there's all, I think, trauma can kind of um, be another uh, kind of in a near death kind of experience way, or at least the same energy or similar energy, that might open up these kind of intuitive gifts in a way. And so I was just wondering, because you've had that kind of experience, when you were shot, like, did you experience kind of visiting
So do you
another
really want to
dimensional realm or anything?
get into like what I physically saw? Everything kind of turned, blue, almost like everything froze, but it was almost more like seeing. I don't really quite know how to experience it. It was like a grid-like view of what was going on. Um,
but everything was blue in this kind of realm. And I mean, this is all in the matter of like a few seconds. So um, I could remember thinking about, or not thinking about, but feeling like the love that my parents had for me.
Mm.
And I don't like to talk about this part of it too much because I'm afraid people might think I'm crazy. But I do feel like, and if you want to get on timelines, whatever continuum it was that I was on, the probabilities of me surviving that incident are very slim.
Mhm.
And it's likely that I died. And I think that I used their love basically to anchor me to a time period where I was still existing. Um,
Wow.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's amazing to me. I mean, this is exactly like what I'm perceiving. And then, and even before I started, I binge watched, okay, this series over the past few days and past week, I guess. And but this was all stuff that it was more of a confirmation rather than, okay, now I've watched this and now I'm kind of connecting it in some way. No, I was thinking a lot of these things and feeling a lot of these things before I even ran into the series. And so it was confirmation for me. And then when I hear what you're saying, it's like I totally get it. I'm starting to like really perceive that even our current experience now, that is not taking even traumatic experiences or near death experiences um, to actually start recognizing or acknowledging ourselves in a multidimensional way. And and I'm wondering, like, if there can't also be some major healing that can happen by having that recognition. For instance, if you've experienced major trauma in your life at some points, um, can you tap into that? And
I know that shamanism is big with that. There's a YouTube channel called Underworld Classroom, and she talks a lot about this stuff called susto and basically soul retrieval after especially narcissistic abuse. And she talks about how when you experience a certain kind of trauma, right, your soul is on a continuum, right, and events are always happening on this continuum. Now, in this trauma, a piece of you doesn't come back from that timeline where that trauma event is occurring, right? So it is constantly repeating this trauma over and over again.
interesting,
Yeah.
interesting.
And so you go back and basically go to these parts of the soul, which are likely at whatever age or consciousness that the person who experienced the abuse was in when they were being abused, and bringing them back to the complete timeline, if that makes sense. So the
So
person doesn't have wholeness.
literally a remembering. Okay, like a remembering is more than just a well, I mean, it would ultimately be a mind thing, which ties into what on Thunderbolt's project they just did I think it was video before last that was posted up. It's called Mind to Matter, where they're discovering that through it we carry through our DNA this ancestral trauma. And we've talked about this within the spiritual community, and more probably uh, about healing ancestral DNA. But it's really interesting that there's now science that's backing that up, which is really cool. I had already kind of had the in what I've experienced in doing some healing for myself over the past year. I recognized that there was definitely some ancestral lineage stuff that I needed to work on. Um,
Yeah, well, and we are products of the cosmos, right? And I think with cosmic evolution, science is finding more and more that just like there's almost a history of the universe in the stars, there's a history of us in the universe within our genetics. And I think it might be fun to like talk about that a little bit with ancestral karma and um, why it is that people might be attached to certain things that have to do with like ancestry, for instance, like being black, even though you may have never experienced racism, right? And if you're born in after the 90s, you may not have, right? But you still might be have memories or have feelings, strong associations with these ideas of slavery and of racism. And why is that? And it turns out that it's actually physically in our DNA.
Exactly.
So that's really crazy.
Yeah, it really is. But in a way, it was kind of freeing for me to have that recognition and that realization and actually focus energy into doing some healing there. Um,
Or
you
even
know,
as a female, think about that ancestral karma, just of the female sex in general, you
right, right. And I don't really want to call it, I don't know, ancestral karma.
or trauma. I didn't mean karma. Sorry,
Okay, yeah, thank
that
you.
sounded terrible. I meant trauma.
Here,
Um,
let me, I don't
I
know.
guess I meant karma because of I think what you're talking about is referred to as miasma, and it's like what they call junk DNA. Uh,
No, I don't know if that's what the Thunderbolts thing is about. Just that they've discovered, the way that our brain operates, that there is, this kind of thing that's carried in our DNA, trauma at least, but probably other things as well. And when I think about, so there's trauma, ancestral trauma that goes way back. And I think this is why there's an important reason why we do want to hold on to, at least for the time being, and hold on to our different lineages as far as race goes. And it's because there's still healing that needs to be done there. We haven't fully moved past that yet. It can happen really quickly once we begin to have this recognition. But I think that we're still in the kind of the beginning parts of all of that. But then I think about, you can apply this to even our own family history that we know about. And I think about even how disease, dis-ease, okay, would be tied into this as well. How there's breast cancer runs in the family, or diabetes runs in the family, that there's a genetic link for it. Even addiction is a genetic link. So how much of that is actually um, physical within the DNA, or is it mind within the DNA? And by kind of changing our perception of the way that we look at what DNA is, then are we able to then rise above and kind of do healing on a much greater level and way um, in the future.
hmm. I think that's
So
a really good question.
yeah, if like, I mean, I told my kids, okay, for instance, their dad and I both had, and my biological father, my biological grandfather, this alcoholism and drug addiction runs deep in our family DNA. So as my kids were growing up, it was, and same with on their father's side. So as the kids were growing up, it was an ongoing, you're going to need to be very careful. Remember the choices that you make, that this is already in your DNA, that you have propensity, is that the right word, towards addictive behavior. And so I think that even by just being honest and verbalizing that to them very clearly, that they were able to consciously make some different choices, which they did, and power to them, because that was not to the benefit of their mom and dad, who had the recognition but still chose otherwise. So was so I think to myself, okay, well, if we have this ability to heal, and we start looking at our DNA and our known family history that's carried down through us genetically, then even going back further, um, what the power that we have to actually heal so many things within ourselves in that way as well. So yeah, we want to take care of ourselves physically, but this is a mental construct. So really, it has to be a combination of the two,
Yes.
because you
Yes.
wonder why, right? You wonder why. Okay, well, I've been a person who has eaten properly and never, did drug, never whatever, yet I still ended up with cancer. Why is that? Okay. So it makes me think about that kind of thing.
Right. Right. Well, and even trying to think on something you just said brought it really clearly to my mind, and I just lost it. But yeah, I do agree that it can help us dive into some of these more complex issues, like diseases like cancer, or perhaps even Alzheimer's is another one I can think of, that can come on for seemingly no reason and seems to have no sort of direct target in terms of the demographics that it affects. And perhaps genetics does have something to do with that. I would agree and say that it definitely does. I think most everything that makes us unique or makes us human is encoded in our DNA, including the diseases we will likely develop and why we have those genetic precursors. And yeah, perhaps it just comes down to like where this body comes from and what happened to the people that created this body and the bodies before that and the bodies before that and so on and so forth, to the point
Exactly.
where it just gets back to one kind of collective melting pot of possibilities. And
But it's really empowering. Yeah. It's
that's
for me,
true.
it's yeah, for me, it's very, very empowering. I think about even uh just some of the family dis-ease, and remembering, like, I could go to my family and I could talk about this kind of stuff, but they're not going to be open to hearing any of this. So in a way, am uh have I been gifted the opportunity to do this for our family? um and 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 is that what time it is right now,
I
with
would
all
say
these.
definitely, most
Mhm.
definitely.
So I don't even have to really, like, get all stressed out and reach out to my family and say, well, you shouldn't be doing this, or you should be doing this, and blah, 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 blah. I don't have to do any of that. I can just keep that really, that knowing, that gnosis within myself, that I have the ability to do this, and I can really put some focus into that, and make that happen.
I
Even
agree with that.
Right, even for my own children. So, there's the past that needs to be dealt with, but there's also the future that needs to be dealt with. My kids were already born. So I can actually put energy and focus where I don't have to say to them that they need to do this, need to do that, need to do this, need to do that. Their awareness is important. But they may not be on the same trip that I'm on, and so they're doing their own lives, and so, but yet I can still project, because they are a projection of myself. I can project into their reality healing energy, focused energy, even. So let's think about this, because we talk about in the in the waking up process, right? How many of us have experienced the whole rejection from our family members or closest friends, and they think that we're crazy and blah 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 blah. So if we get to that place where we don't necessarily have to um, feel that they have to be woke in order for them to be make it to what? Make it to where? You know, I don't even know how to
Exactly.
say it anymore, because the way that I used to think is so different from the way that I do now. But there's people who are still in those places of, you know, just now kind of coming into their awareness and are experiencing that hurt and that pain of, you know, the desperate desire to save their other family members because they don't know what's going on, or that pain of being rejected by them because they think you're crazy. um, that we no longer have to um, pull them into this, knowing that their time will come too in the time that it's meant to, or that may not, but that we still have the opportunity to be empowered within our own family and be that person that is stepping up to that plate to do that healing of the past and creating something new in the future.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think this ties really well into, uh, what does that mean for being a woman? And as far as like
Mm,
women's rights issues goes, and the whole topic of feminism, what does actual feminism look like? And it is healing the past and creating something new from the future, yet we see ourselves warring with old, or I don't think you and I see ourselves warring with that. I think,
mm,
though, the collective perception is that women are often trying to prove that they can do something just as well as a man,
mhm.
rather than saying, hey, here's where we're different, you know.
Right, right. Embracing each other for our differences, which actually are come together and empower each other. You know, it's a pretty cool way that I perceive that it works anyway. Um, and so it is about just lifting each other up. It doesn't matter male or female, but in inspiring into creative energy and healing energy. It's really a lot more simple than you know how complicated we want to make it sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, how many other people have you had the opportunity to talk to who've experienced near death experiences?
Not well, one person, CJ Donaldson, I did an interview with him on my channel. And he was actually in a coma for quite a while. Um, hold on, give me one second.
I'm actually finding that it's more common than I think than we realize. I think that it's something that people have not felt very comfortable sharing about, but that it's actually been experienced more than what we realize, and which I find very interesting and very fascinating. And it really kind of ties into this whole intuition and multidimensional experience. And I'd really like to kind of, you know, maybe help open up that dialogue for those who may feel uncomfortable talking about it. You know,
Oh
especially
yeah,
kind of.
I think for good reason. I read this book, Proof of Heaven, which was about a neuroscientist who got that rare brain disease, and it affects your cerebral scopic fluid. And it's some kind of infection, but he was in a coma and he had this experience, which he writes about. And now he believes in heaven and is also a practicing neuroscientist. Um,
Mm,
so I think when we talk about how hard it can be. Like he talks about that some in the book, that amongst the scientific community, stuff like that is kind of a joke or is seen as a little bit of a fantasy. And it really doesn't make sense because I think I don't know, I just don't understand even people that say, oh, well, that's just neurochemistry or it's just something that happens when your brain goofs up. Is like, but then there's the experience of that, right? Which is something
Right.
entirely different than what you're talking about or rationalizing it as. And so many
Exactly.
people share it. How do you explain that? Like,
Yeah. I don't think that it's a necessary part of being able to uh, jump timelines or um, have awareness of alternate dimensional realities. I think that it's uh, this change in vibrational energy that is kind of been happening in ebb and flow kind of ways for a while now is helping us to do that. But I think that the conversation of near death experience and intuition of
well,
I
sometimes
don't
too,
think that it's past life. I mean, you can call okay, DNA and lineage. There's past life and
they may be the same thing. What
yeah,
people
that's
may
what I'm kind
perceive
of
as past life experiences might be,
actually,
genetic memory or something
or
akin
even
to that. I've thought about that a lot. Like
mhm,
people have
mhm.
talked about, like, oh, I have this dream that I was a shaman in another life, and was that a past life experience? And it's like, well, technically, I guess so, but does that really mean that your consciousness lived in a physical body that was a shaman back then? Well, maybe not, but maybe one of your ancestors was. You know what I mean?
Now that's an interesting way of
Maybe,
looking at it as well.
that's a memory that's in your genetics,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
because when I was younger, I used to have memories of things that happened with my dad and his parents and weird shit like that, but the memories are much different than my actual lived experience. Like those memories have a different quality to them, that it's almost like watching them, not like I've been there, you know.
Interesting. So one of the experiences that I've had that seems to have been kind of repeated. Now, my biological father was adopted as a baby, so we really don't know anything further back than that about him. But in his adult life, he was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and then he was murdered. He was shot in the back of the head
My
by,
God.
by somebody that he knew, by a neighbor, actually. And so one thing that had repeated for me in my life, okay, was the alcohol. And I wasn't raised by him. I was raised by, a father who was not a major alcoholic and drug addict. And I'm the only one in my family who went down that road. So there's that connection there. Um, I'm also the firstborn, which is kind of interesting. But and so in my own alcohol and drug experiences, there were there was twice when someone brought a gun into my home and intended to harm me. Now, how coincidental is that? I don't believe in coincidence, and I find it very odd that I even ended up traveling down that road to begin with, because there was no reason for it. The way that the home that I was raised in, the opportunities that I was given, there was really no reason why I made the choices that I did, but I did, and then to have them kind of repeat and play out in the way the kind of similarity in that is really interesting to me. Um, and so I think to myself, well, was there something that was ultimately broken because I didn't end up dying in those experiences? So, did that kind of break a cycle in some way? And I don't know. I just find it very, very fascinating that I would have ended up there. So let me ask you this. Have you in your family that you are aware of, have there been any other incidences of, the family members in your history who have been shot
No.
or close to that?
No. No, there's a lot of weird things about the circumstances surrounding my birth and my like, where the hell did she get that from? Like, nobody knows. Um, kind of a deal. So
Interesting.
on that end, there aren't I mean, let me think. No, not a whole lot of similarities.
So no one else in your family who's had like near death experiences?
I wouldn't say that. I know that nobody in my family that I know of has had any kind of experience like as serious. But I've definitely still seen the patterns. For example, like on my mom's side of the family, she came from a family that was not so loving. You know what I mean? And not affectionate. You know, that used the what do they call it? The Spock method, which is basically where you completely ignore the child. Uh, So,
Oh,
like, whenever they're crying,
right. When
yeah,
they're,
teach them to self-soothe, and so my mom kind of made the decision to break that cycle, you know, so seeing those 2 polarities, because my grandmother lives in a mother-in-law suite behind our house, and, seeing those 2 polarities at play is really intense and very extreme. Um, and then there are other ones on my dad's side of the family as well. Most of those are, like, related to, like, cancer and that kind of a deal. Um, so yeah, I definitely see it, and I see it in other people as well that we're all kind of playing out a combination of what our parents went through and what then, like, they're playing out a combination of what their parents went through and so on and so on and so on.
and
So
so your mom was a cycle breaker, and so it sounds to, obviously you're going to be a cycle breaker as well. Um, which is really cool. I think that I was a silent cycle breaker too, um, in more ways than one within my family. But it kind of in a very interesting way when it comes to the whole drugs and alcohol um, addiction kind of thing with my children, because rather than me, telling them, you know, or living the life of not being in, because I know, I've experienced that I didn't necessarily live the experience of living with an alcoholic or a drug addict. I did very early, very, very early, between 1 and 4 is when I was with my biological father. And I actually found out some things about that, and I don't remember any of it. But I found out some things recently about some trauma that happened then that I wasn't aware of. Um, so I was raised by this father who was are you in here twice? I was raised by my father.
Yeah, sorry, I needed to
That's
run
okay.
out to the living room really quick.
So
So I had to switch to
I
my
was raised by my father, who was not an alcoholic and drug addict, great, great family and upbringing, yet I still ended up going down that path myself. And I never thought, when I had my own kids, I never thought that I would be a mom who would not be a mom to my kids, who would essentially not be in their lives because I was choosing to drugs and alcohol over them. Bottom line, that's just straight up reality. And so I never thought that I would be that kind of mom. I'm a good mom, and I know that I am. So it wasn't until years and years and years later that I realized that it was actually a gift to them to live that life so that they could see it play out. and know what not to do. So in a way that, and be very honest with them about it, through that path as well. So that, yeah, they didn't have their mom, or the mom that society says that we're supposed to have and supposed to be to our children. Yet it was because I made the choices that I made and was honest with them about it, that they were able to make choices not to go down that road. And then also have very open conversations about depression and about, just whatever, just have very open conversations about it. I think that made a huge difference in their life. Whereas if, because of the DNA thing, if I had maybe done things differently, because they had so many opportunities to go down that road themselves, that they would have made very different choices, or gotten caught up in very different ways. And then that would have extended one more generation of, where is this cycle going to break?
Right. Well, and I mean, that's where else you can really delve into it metaphysically. And when we talk about being multidimensional beings, if you want to get into it, there are even suggestions that, some of our collective genetics, some of our genetic memories are implants, or um, not things we've actually experienced, but collective, like, stories we have been telling since the beginning. You know what I mean? If you go back to ancient Sumeria, I want to say maybe it's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest kind of religious text, or the story which all stories have been based off of as we know them. And that, like, on that front, there hasn't been much evolution, but there have been several things that have been planted in due to our cultural or social shifting. And perhaps this is the whole of what we've been taught as human history. Um, who's to say? Like, I talk all the time about violence and how, like, okay, if this has been happening for so long, why would we even have PTSD? Like, don't you think we'd be pretty mentally well equipped for violence now? If it's been happening, and I'm like, okay, where are the medieval infographics? Like, because people love to use, all these charts and stuff, and it's like, wait, this was all made last month. Like, where's the person who has a firsthand account of this historical, what I mean, event that was before photos, before there was any kind of recordable media? How do you actually know? You know what I mean? It's only half a perspective. It's just a narrative at that point. And that can become really interesting there.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that, because there was a point in time when I had a huge realization. Now, talk about intuition, okay? So, back in my early 20s, before I had children, um, I had kind of a vision, I guess, is what I always kind of referred to it as. And it was, I saw myself in a kind of an apocalyptic time, and there was a lot of orphaned children, and I was there, kind of to teach them how to love again. That was the impression of this whole vision thing. Then when I saw um, Terminator, the first Terminator, I resonated like so much with that movie. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm being like, I've been there already. Okay. Then many years later, this was within the past few couple 3 years, I had this moment of clarity, of kind of recognition that, wait a second, I don't think that this was an actual vision of a future time. I think that it might be an implant for me to manifest that time. And how bizarro is that? And and so that it was at that moment when I had that recognition that I was like, okay, I don't have to hang on to this as a premonition anymore.
Well, yeah, and I was even starting an article about this, and the title is kind of clickbait, and it's going to be how to deprogram or how to avoid subconscious programming, right? Is to program yourself consciously and
Mm-hmm.
to understand that, like, narrative or storytelling as a form of entertainment. And, like, a lot of people don't like to think very hard. A lot of people enjoy being submerged in the unconscious, right? But your subconscious mind is always questioning, well, what does that mean? How does this, go into who I am, how I form my identity? And slowly over time, we find if we are not being conscious of, like, what does this mean to me? How am I going to make meaning of this story? So you don't subconsciously pick it up and play out God knows what, project God, God knows what into your environment, because you never stop to question, how do I feel about this, or how will I integrate this? Um,
Yes, it's
like a time you see
awareness.
something.
Sorry, it
No,
really is next level awareness, and peeling back kind of the deeper programming that's going on that's very, very subconscious. So now we're talking about, we've got conscious, subconscious, we've got DNA, and so no wonder that this intuition that is like ramping up and becoming part of our radar, um, that we've never had, that we've forgotten about, that is part of our remembering, that is part of our integration, that this is what's kind of going on, and it's something that can be cultivated and utilized to our advantage for healing, for actually manifesting as
I was
well.
going to say manifesting. It's
Yes.
what you consider, kind of to be the thing of magic,
Yes.
or the whole, the whole chutzpah.
It's really empowering. I have found it to be extremely empowering, but I'm still, because it wasn't cultivated in me as a child, because I didn't have that great aunt who was an intuitive, who, let me know that I was okay and that I didn't need to run away from my intuition or hide from it, you know, um, kind of tapping into it and then peeling back the layers of the actual programming that's there, doing some DNA kind of healing stuff, and breaking some cycles and stuff like that. It's all a big part of it. And it's really quite the adventure. And you can make an adventure. It doesn't have to be a stressful, painful, like, people talk about the shadow work. I don't think that it has to be like this painful trip, man. It can be a intuitive, inspirational, healing kind of experience that doesn't need to get all dark. Yeah, the dark's there, but we can be empowered into it. We like going into the shadow work, that this can be an empowering experience. You can do it in an empowering way rather than having to fall to pieces and put yourself back together kind of way.
Right. Well, an organic authenticity or authentic thought, creativity, imagination comes from, you know, the subconscious. So
Mhm,
therein again, like you're saying, or the shadow, right? That
mhm.
which seems like is total chaos, almost like a dream, is just one random event to another for most people. Um, that's where all of our creativity and our inspiration kind of comes from. So, yeah, I think there is something to expressing this in ways that, like, it doesn't have to be all heavy and, like, about demons or, shadow work, integrating your crap. Sometimes it's just expressing what's inside of you. That can be as dark as it goes.
Well, and I've started to kind of recognize too that there's uh, that now I have, okay, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, or the best way to say this. So now that I have conscious awareness of what I'm perceiving as uh, multidimensional Vickies, okay, that that I can be much more conscious in that experience, in experiencing that to intuition, and then I can look back too at my life experiences and what I felt or thought was extremely traumatic for this dimensional Vicky. Okay, I can now say to myself, maybe that was another dimensional experience that was bleeding through, because it seems so out of character, so out of the realm of how did I end up in that place at that moment, that in some way there's something empowering and healing about having that kind of different perception of the experience.
Oh yeah, well this is why else, mental or spiritual crisis. I know I don't want to speak for all of shamanism, and I am by no means a shaman, but from what I remember of my studies in shamanism, spiritual crisis, or kind of having a what you would call a psychotic break, which means just to lose touch with this reality, you know, um, is a precursor to the shamanic impulse, or the becoming of a shaman, right? A lot of people that are considered to be schizophrenic are technically seeing through other realms, like you're talking
I think so
about.
too.
So,
I think so too.
yeah.
Yeah, that then, and it's funny because growing up as a kid, my grandmother was schizophrenic. Now she wasn't born with schizophrenia. Her mind was shattered when she was brutally beaten by her husband for years, and so that in her escapism, this is what ended up ultimately happening. Now, because she also was Catholic, the church has a great way of labeling. If you're hearing voices, you're hearing demons. And if you're seeing things, you're seeing demons. You're not just actually perceiving another dimensional reality. So schizophrenia often plays out as a very the whole spiritual war thing, demons and angels, and you're being people who are possessed and stuff like that. um, do possessions happen by negative, entities or energies? Yeah, sure. I think so. But the church definitely exasperates uh, rather than being as serious, which I think is what my grandmother actually was, which I think is in my lineage actually. Um, and that she had that mind-breaking moment in the brutality and her trauma, but there was, especially in those days, okay, the experiences that, and this is kind of in this series that I've been watching, the OA, it's kind of interesting too, because they're in the first part. Okay, it's done in parts, so it shows the first part is one kind of timeline, and then it goes into another part that's another timeline, and then it's going to ultimately go into a third part, I'm sure. But in these timelines, they're they're trapped by a psychopath who has them compartmentalized in these kind of cages, right? And I think to myself, well, these are all characters in our own mind that get compartmentalized as coping mechanisms, and the different ways that we cope with these different traumatic experiences. So the layers of this series are really, really, really deep. But the experiences that back in my grandmother's time, back in the 50s and 60s, the mental hospitals, mental institutions, and this goes even back further, into the late 1800s, they had mental institutions where, crazy people would be taken. You might as well go all the way back to, at least they weren't burning witches on the cross anymore, or burning witches on the stake, anymore, like they did to get rid of the midwifery, right?
Right.
But so instead, they switched it up and started throwing, especially women, into mental institutions. And then the brutality that they received in those places, electroshock therapy, and just overly medicated, and the rape that was going on in there as well. These are things that are experienced. When you talk about women and what they've done, whoever, the powers that shouldn't be, the people who have more awareness than others, who decided that it was okay to take control of this shit in a very sick and disgusting way, to suppress what they've done to suppress women's intuitive gifts, is on a really sick level, in my
Right.
opinion.
And therefore, all of our intuitive gifts, because the whole of the
Right.
human
We're not
species is
nurturing
passed
our
down through
boys.
the mother,
Yes,
through
exactly.
women.
Exactly.
And that's why else in our culture to see women degraded so badly sometimes, or I wouldn't say women degraded because that's kind of like a stereotypical view of our culture, but to see it interpreted like that and then continued on for so long is kind of interesting. What does that say about how we feel of the human race as a whole, you know, since women are the ones who carry on.
Yeah, and this is why the guys are just as equally important in the whole scenario of, we need to lift both each need to lift the other up into, experiencing uh, this dimensional reality in a very different way. Our sensory perception of this dimensional reality, um, is what kind of, and this is my opinion, is what ultimately merges together to remember, to bring together those other dimensions into kind of, people are calling it the shift into the new earth, or you can call it ascension, you can call it whatever you want. I don't think we go anywhere. I don't think that anything splits off from here. I think it actually converges and merges into here, and making this experience uh, different, and then people talk about, I really wonder how far that can actually be carried out, um, because there's obviously been geological events that are occurring too, that are a part of all of this, that have been a part of this, our perception of the past, our history.
For some time.
For quite some time, okay, and then you have this archaeology and geology that shows these, catastrophic events that happen over and over. But I'm really beginning to wonder how much of that is actually some programmed stuff. um like, I don't think that the pyramids are from here. I think that they're from another dimensional reality that bled through in the past, that ended up staying here. If that's what I think happened, because I've seen it. I've seen that kind of happening now in the way that I perceive this, my sensory perception and what I can see. Things have definitely changed for me in sight and in smell and in taste and hearing and all of that. And so it sounds absolutely utterly crazy that, oh, Vicky's seeing pyramids out of, bleeding through in another dimensional reality into this one. I don't think I've heard anybody else say that, but I've seen it. It's not
Yeah,
kind
no,
of
I don't think it sounds crazy.
like
I think
so
it's a theory.
So
for sure.
when we ask ourselves, well, how did they build the pyramids? Well, I don't think that they did in this 3D. I think it was done in
Well, I
another.
don't think we'll ever have like a conclusive answer to that. Like,
And I don't think
I
it's
mean, and we may.
to like find the proof of that either. I don't feel like when I say that I have to be right,
Yeah,
or that even that it has to be proved. Okay, it's just another theory in all actuality of and then that would be my own, just based on my own experience and what I've seen. But it opens one's mind to being intuitively tapped into something more than what we've been programmed from birth. And this intuition does get passed down through our DNA, and it's been twisted up. It's been called all kinds of mental health issues, um, and then we're medicated to death to whatever,
yeah,
to suppress it even more. And
I,
then you add drugs and alcohol because of trauma experiences, and then that suppresses it more. It's really interesting that the ways that they've attempted to suppress our intuition, our intuitive gifts.
I agree. I
Hmm.
agree.
And if they've got the
Unfortunately, I
great,
gotta hop off. I'm sorry. I gotta get ready. I
that's
gotta
okay.
go run
We'll
and
close
do
out.
my stuff too.
Do you have any closing last words that you'd like to share?
Well, just thank you for having me on here, and I think we tapped into some really interesting topics. I'm really glad that we got to touch base and kind of go a little bit out of this world for a change. It was nice.
Right on. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully, we'll have more ladies joining us next week. I want to thank everybody. I guess we'll close it right here.
Bye,
And,
everybody.
and thank everybody for joining us. Y'all are awesome. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Bye now.